Hi all, welcome to Unbiased Rugby. Today I'm joined by Haka Rugby. Welcome Zach to the show.
Thanks a lot, mate. Glad to be here and looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. And I've got some, I must admit, I do have some radical ideas when it comes to Sanzaar. Sanzaar, I don't know if you have the same feeling with New Zealand rugby that I have with Saru, that sometimes I think, good grief, where did they come up with their ideas? Where's their future planning, things like that. And so I just thought, I've really been enjoying your content, and I just thought we'd maybe go through a few questions about Sanzaar, Super Rugby, Southern Hemisphere Rugby in general, and just give our opinion on where we think things are going.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely in a position now that if something isn't done, and don't want it to come across negatively, because certainly, I believe Super Rugby as a product and in terms of the player pool, it's really, really good. I think, as you say, they've just lost their way on a few different things that have probably impacted some of the, entertainment value for the fans and maybe confuse people here or there. So I think there's definitely opportunities for them to, get a little bit better in a few areas. And I've certainly got the tinfoil hat ready. I've come up with some pretty radical ideas myself, so ready to have that conversation.
Oh, sure. So what we'll do is maybe I was thinking, to try to give us a little bit of direction. We'll start off with where Super Rugby is at the moment, a few little areas of concerns, and then we can maybe move into. I know you were talking about quite a lot developing tier 2 nations, things like that, and including them in the Sanzaar family. And then we'll move on to Sanzaar, and then we'll try and maybe look at maybe some kind of solutions that we could see to the kind of problems. I'm just going to. So we see here, do you see a future with the current status quo of Super Rugby?
So I think the answer to that is probably no. I know certainly there was a push towards expansion. Now it looks like there's a push towards retraction. Obviously, the other side of it was the conference model that's been implemented. And I understand the reason for that. Obviously, there's player management issues and travel becomes a significant issue for a lot of players. So that feels like that's the reason behind the conference model. And I actually prefer a lot of those local derbies, but just something in there has become a little bit confusing for fans, I think, around the structure of the conference model. And I think there's still a hunger for people to see a lot more of those inter-country battles. Local derbies are great, but Super Rugby almost feels like it should be the pinnacle of club rugby, It feels like it should be, the top teams quite regularly playing each other, or at least at a regular, time frame. And I think the fact that they've gone for a full, growth model into Argentina and Japan, and now looking to pull that back, that's probably a sign that it hasn't worked, unfortunately, or maybe there's been teething issues there along the way. So, I think. Those things considered, I don't think the current model that they are implementing is probably right for Super Rugby right now. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree with 100%. It might actually go into our next question, but I'll come up with that. We'll catch on to those questions. Yes, I fully agree. I remember watching Super 10, Super 12, and talking, that was highly entertaining rugby. It was full round robin. There was no conference system at all, and it just seemed like the games were a lot more attended. They were easier to understand the point system, and it just seemed like people were a hell of a lot more engaged with the actual product, the product itself. And I'm not saying that the conference system is wrong. I can understand because of the vast distances between all the countries. You can understand why have a conference system, but the way that it's actually at the moment, it's rewarding from my personal point of view, mediocrity. Because you're always going to have an Australian team and a South African team, even if they're not performing, making it through, and it just doesn't seem 100% right to me. Maybe having a conference system, but still only rewarding top points. Maybe that's the way to go. But I know that they were also talking, like the New Zealand derbies are quite hard. They're very, very physical. You take a Crusaders Hurricanes game, and that's a pretty intense game, and that gets played twice. whereas like a South African team may play a New Zealand team once in a season, even sometimes they even skip somebody for a whole year. In my personal opinion, I don't think the current system is working 100%.
Yeah. Do you think part of it is a product of obviously the rugby season in particular, both domestic level and international level, it's becoming very, very long. So, there just seems to be a real push. And I wonder if part of the issues with Super Rugby is that regular conflict between, obviously, there's an international windows that need to be maintained versus how important really is Super Rugby to Sanzaar.
That's a big question. That is a really big question. Considering now, I know that a lot of the South African sides now the franchises are becoming independent, so they're not going to form really part of the SARU model. I'm not sure how it works in New Zealand, who actually owns the franchises, but I know there was in the news today, Patrick Masepe is a billionaire here in South Africa. He's just bought 37% stake in the Blue Bulls. So you can see that now the model here is changing a little bit, where the franchises are starting to be owned by billionaires or individual companies. I don't know if that's the same there in New Zealand or Australia.
Yeah, I think from a New Zealand perspective, there's still a lot. I mean, they are private to a degree, but there's a lot of decisions that are taken out of the hands of the franchises. And a lot of weighting is put towards the All Blacks taking the preference, whether it's player availability and all of those things. And the coaches themselves are very, very closely integrated to the All Black system. So there's regular discussions there around how they manage players, and to a degree, the All Blacks have some influence there. New Zealand Rugby has some influence there over the franchises, and to me, that's if you really want the franchise model to work, it has to be autonomous. They have to be self-fulfilling, and they have to be able to make key decisions on their own. The danger you get into is that then franchises start to drive the conversation around international rugby and really dictate. And we've seen some of that play out in Europe and other areas with the franchises there. So finding the right balance is the key, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, I 100% agree with you there. Maybe this will go straight into our next question, where basically what areas need to be addressed. But let's not. I think there's hundreds of areas that need to be addressed. But maybe if we could think of one or two things that we could fix like really quickly, that could really change the model completely. And if I look here, sorry, I'm just gonna show the other two questions, and then we can talk about them all at the same time.
Yeah.
So we've got how can Super Rugby scale if into other markets, and does it make sense? Yeah. And then obviously the conference system has dropped to scale. But we'll go through to the first question.
Yeah. One or two areas. I mean, there's a couple that jump out to mind that they're pushing this year, which I quite like. They've made a simple change in New Zealand around the schedule with, moving games from 7:30 p.m. to 6:30 or 7 p.m. Right, just to try and make it a bit more family friendly and get a bit more, family audiences there in stadiums. I think they've looked at it and said, well, there's definitely a reduction in attendance at the stadium. So what little things can we do? So that's one they're doing. But I don't know, there's just so much competition for entertainment right now that people seem to be favoring sitting at home on their phone and looking at other stuff. There's still, obviously there's, a big loyalty and fan base towards rugby, but there's a battle there to capture people's attention. That's what I see. And so when I look at things that need to be addressed, actually, I'll touch on another point. I was looking at some of the attendance records in Australia in particular, and what I found that was quite interesting is very, very competitive in Australia, and that there's multiple sports, vying for the same fans and the same player pools, player skill sets. So you've got AFL, you've got rugby, you've got rugby league, you've got other codes. Soccer is obviously taking a lot of the young players away as well. But what they found there is that Super Rugby is sort of sitting a little bit below rugby league and a lot below AFL here in Australia. And when you look at the attendance records, there's been a number of games that have actually been really, really competitive from with the other codes from an attendance perspective. And that's teams that are either winning and doing well, or teams that are playing some of the other big well-known teams. I know the biggest attendance records in Australia have been when the Crusaders have been in town and when the Hurricanes have been in town. So I think being mindful around, the product that you've got there and factoring in schedules that suit, to promote the game in certain areas, I think is one. Pushing the Crusaders brand or other major franchises into those markets, I think is important. Getting the scheduling right. I would like to overall see a reduction in teams, though. I just think I'm like you. I remember Super 12. I remember, back when the Blues were really competitive. Sorry, Blues fans, that's a little low blow, but I remember those days, and there just seemed to be something. You really look forward to each week's games, and whether that was because it was a little bit more scarce, and that there weren't as many games, maybe that's one thing. Maybe there was a bit less rugby at that time. But if the goal is to really engage fans and keep their engagement, I think, getting the balance of teams, the number of teams right, and focusing on the schedule is probably a couple of quick wins.
Okay. For me, I think the biggest thing is the engagement with the fans. Because if I look at the attendance at the stadiums, it is dropping off. And I think we all suffer from the same thing in the Southern Hemisphere. We have these pretty large stadiums. I was watching Connacht play. I think it was Montpellier last weekend, and it looks like a schoolboy stadium. Like, I'm not lying to you. It must be about 4,000 or 5,000 people only at the stadium, and it looked absolutely packed, and it was quite festive. And whereas 5,000 people at Eden Park is. Yeah. That doesn't even fill up a little tier. And I know if I look at what the Sharks have been doing, they've closed their whole top tier system, the entire system at the top at Kings Park, and that's just full of advertising. So that's a quick way to obviously bring people's attention down lower. But then we need to have a way of bringing people into the stadiums. South Africa's pretty unique. We've got quite a big disparity between high-income earners and low-income earners. It's the nature of it being a developing nation, and I think maybe the pricing of the tickets or the way that the tickets are sold to the public it's just not conducive for people who don't earn as much to actually go through to the stadium and actually get value for money. Because to go to the stadium to get decent tickets, they range from about 50 to 160 rand, which doesn't sound like a lot of money. But you want to go get a beer, and you want to go have a hot dog, and you want to take the wife, and you want to take your two kids. It starts adding up. And whereas I could go spend the same amount of money for a whole month and get to watch TV for the whole month. So I've got to weigh those things up. So for me, it's just to try to get people into the stadiums to try, and I don't know how to actually do that. Either adding more value add to the product that's at the stadium. Giving the seat, the prices of the tickets at a much more affordable rate. Yeah. And then the other one, I'm thinking, like, when I say drop the amount of Super Rugby teams, I mean really drop the amount of Super Rugby teams. I'm talking like Super 8. I'm talking taking it way down to about 8 and almost having two divisions. So having a Premier League and a Serie A, or whatever you want to call it. Group A, and then the bottom two teams at the end of the season, automatic relegation promotion. No playoff games or anything like that. It's automatic. The top two teams from the bottom A go up to Premier, and the bottom two teams of Premier go down, and then obviously make it a lot more competitive year on year. I don't know what you think of that kind of idea.
I like a second tier option. And if we're looking at quick wins, probably the other thing I'd want to target, and I think reducing the number of teams probably helps this from a game management perspective. But, when the All Blacks say, I don't want, some of the best players playing in Super Rugby this week, we've got to manage their workload, et cetera, that does nothing for Super Rugby as a product. Right? And I think keeping the best players on the field is very, very important. So if player management is an issue, then we should be looking at reducing games for sure. Right, that's the only real way to manage that side of it. The other thing is there's a flow of talent up north. So again, back to this point around keeping the best players on the field, I think that probably needs to be looked at. Why is the north becoming a destination of choice for a lot of players. And then I'd say, 9 times out of 10, it's probably money. For having a competitive product for Super Rugby means that you've got to grow to a level where franchises can pay that kind of coin to be competitive. But that's a long way off. That's not until we're at the point where, like you say, where fans are engaged, where they're coming to the grounds, where they're spending money, where the franchises are profitable and everyone wins. So just back to your question on the Tier 1, Tier 2 model, I like it. I do think there is room there for a second tier option. The challenge we start to find, though, from a promotion and relegation perspective is, let's say New Zealand starts to get, perform really, really poor on average. Then you could have a situation where, there's only one, possibly two teams from New Zealand, and in that model, if there's a flow of relegation over time. So I think there's something in the Tier 1 to Tier 2 thing. I think we'd probably need to find the right balance from a promotion relegation perspective. That means that all teams are still represented well in the final product. Or maybe you just say, if you're good enough, you'll be in. If you're not good enough, you're out. I don't know if that's the right answer, but
I think I was watching the breakdown, and Sir John Kerwin, who drives me crazy sometimes, and then sometimes he comes up with some great ideas. He was talking about integrating, and obviously we've got the Curry Cup system, Curry Cup competition locally. New Zealand have the Mitre 10. What's Australia got there?
They've got the NRC.
Yeah, the NRC. So literally you obviously have those competitions. Now, the problem with the derbies in South Africa is that Curry Cup rugby and Super Rugby essentially it's the same teams. They're a few different players, but they're essentially the same teams. The only difference is in Curry Cup, you don't have the Springboks. So, because Springboks aren't allowed to play in the Curry Cup. Well, I think that was under the old contract. And he was essentially saying that you have your Curry Cup system, your top 2-3 teams from your Curry Cup system get promoted, obviously, to play in Super Rugby the following year. So it's the same as how the European Cup gets, the Champions Cup gets done in Europe. So you have your Mitre 10, your NRC. I don't know about Argentina, but those you come first and second, you automatically through to the Super Rugby the following year.
Yeah, that could work. That would be very interesting, because there's some, there's a lot of small town teams that play in that Mitre 10 Cup, and I could just imagine a case if they made the Super Rugby. Oh, those small towns would just be going off. Actually, those would be the games you'd want to attend.
Because, exactly. You've got nothing to lose.
50,000, 20,000 people, mate, they'll all be at the stadium or standing outside the stadium,
Now, look, I think there's a few options. I like the Pro 14 model of their conference system. Only for the only reason is obviously they're fairly lucky is that they have 4 New Zealand island sides, 2 South Africans, 2 Irish. So it's all even numbers. So they can have an equal amount in both conferences of countries. And I think the model works. You play everyone in your own conference home and away, and then you play everyone in the other conference once, either home or away. Now that's a system that could work because it's almost round robin. And it actually, when I was doing the maths, I was thinking, oh, geez, does it actually create too many games? But it works out to 14 games in your own conference, and then 8 games in the other, which is 22 games for the year, which is still quite a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's 3 more than what we've got at the moment.
Yeah.
But the other nice thing about having a 2-tier system, a Premier and the other one, is essentially that you only play 14 games in the season. So you don't have to rest any of your players because they're already rested. Because they only skip, I think, 2 or 3 games if you're an All Black or a Springbok or something like that for your player management.
Yeah, I like it. I like that. Seems a bit more manageable and has that right link to Tier 1, Tier 2, I guess, and it sounds good.
I just know that we have Curry Cup, and then we have a second division for Curry Cup, and there's a Namibian side, and I think there's an Argentinian side that plays in it as well. And eventually, because the clubs had no money, they eventually just say, no, we'll lose to Namibia. So they don't even travel to Namibia. They just say, no, we'll forfeit the game. And that's another scenario, because there's just not enough money to travel up to up to the spot, so they'd rather just lose the game, which is
obviously that's a shame.
Not great. It is not great. Okay, let me look here. Okay, I think this one is a nice question.
Well, it probably builds on what you just mentioned about Namibia having a pathway into, more of the Curry Cup end. I feel like the Tier 2 side would probably support, a way where franchises can encourage Tier 2 nations to get involved. I know in the NRP, and I must admit I'm not fully up to date with the current structure of that, but they had a Fijian team playing there at one stage. And I know in Rugby League they have a Papua New Guinean team that play in some of the, the second tier competitions in Australia. So good way of promoting those teams getting involved at that next level down. And then obviously giving them a pathway into professional sides. So yeah, I'd like to see that expanded more. And I think New Zealand's one country in particular that needs to push that from a Pacific Island point of view. If we look around the immediate area, you could have very, very competitive teams from Fiji, from Tonga, from Samoa, playing in a Mitre 10 Cup type format. The only question becomes the money side of it. And I think you would see a similar situation. Some of these smaller clubs, unfortunately, they can't, they wouldn't have enough money to send teams over to, the islands for different games. But as a product, it would just be an incredible product, because, we saw it in the Rugby World Cup, what the Fijians bring, and the Tongans and the Samoans, incredible style of game. And there's probably just not enough exposure there. And I think those are probably the two key things that I'd like to see from both the franchises, but also from New Zealand Rugby in particular, is get them involved in more games. And even if that means, sending some of your teams over there to play, if there's a match between, let's say, Hurricanes and the Blues played in Fiji or Samoa, it's a good way of engaging teams, engaging different countries. But really what you want is those pathways into the franchises to be strong. You've probably got some of that now. I know New Zealand comes under a lot of criticism around, the skills that it gets from the Pacific Island nations. But there has to be some benefit back there for the island nations, is the way I see it. It all feels a bit too one-sided,
No, it does. It does. Like obviously I live in Africa, and we have there's a whole Africa competition. There's an Africa Cup. There's all the African nations play each other, and Namibia is probably one of the best, the better nations in that. And we actually don't get involved with it at all, and we don't even send a team across. Yes, it's like sending a nuclear weapon to a knife fight, but we don't send anything. We actually don't even have no representation in there at all. And what frustrated me the most was, when it came to when they were voting for where the next World Cup was going to be, Africa voted against us, and they voted for France. The reason being is they obviously get more money. So it's just a little bit frustrating that I'm in Africa and I live in Africa and I have no engagement with what's happening around me in Namibia, Madagascar, their national sports rugby. Who would have thought? So there's so much opportunity and scope to actually promote the game overseas. The one game between Namibia and I think it was Madagascar or something like that, there were 50,000 people in the stadium. Morocco easily fills in 50,000 people in a stadium, and we're not involved in it at all. I watched some of those games that play in the islands, and those stadiums are full. So it's maybe not expanding with teams, but maybe expanding the product to the actual grassroots audience.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's something in that. I think pre-season's a prime opportunity, to showcase Super Rugby in different places. I know that was one of your suggestions that Super Rugby weekends or whatever it is, just a way of pushing the product into other places that could benefit it, but also to help push the product.
Yeah, I went to go watch the Rugby Sevens at the Cape Town Stadium last year, and it was the most entertaining weekend. yes, there was loads of rugby, and that was like super exciting. But everyone got so involved, and even there's a pre-match game that we have. It's the Superheroes Day here in Cape Town Stadium, where we have the Bulls, the Sharks, the Lions, and the Stormers all playing on the same day in the same stadium. Everyone gets dressed up, and the stadium is absolutely packed. And that's, for me, is trying to give some value to. So say you have Eden Park, or I know the Cape Town's probably a better stadium for that. So you have the Lions, the Crusaders, the Hurricanes, and the Jaguares, or whatever. 4 or 5 teams or 6 teams playing on the day, 3 games in a row, highly entertaining, very festive. You buy one ticket, you've got the whole day's entertainment. You can come and go with your family. It just makes it like a spectacle.
Yeah, I agree. I think they need to get, a bit smarter around exactly that, how they position games as opportunities to pull things together, create more of a festive atmosphere. But I also think I like some of the partnerships they're pushing. I know with the Marvel links and with the other links, I like some of those partnerships that will engage fans that are interested in both brands, let's say. So Superhero Weekend, for example, or and I think kids in particular like seeing that kind of alignment. Not done as much in New Zealand or Australia, done more in the rugby league side in Australia, but I think there's an opportunity for Super Rugby to look at partnerships that can help promote it in different areas. And they should be looking at pulling influencers like us, mate, so we can, get involved in the teams.
No, I did a whole show and I wrote an article about it a while ago. It's the rise of esports. And my opinion is, I grew up, there were no consoles or anything when I grew up. I went and played sport and I came home and that was it, So, but nowadays, a rugby player who's 18, he's probably more proficient. He's proficient on the field and he's proficient with the controller in his hand. So the rise of esports is becoming really big. And I know the Sharks have just recently invested in their own esports team that is going to start competing in various other competitions. And it's just another way of getting some kind of cross-pollination between codes, for want of a better word. Because the sponsorships for esports are completely different to the sponsorships to actual rugby. And there could be quite a lot of crossover between the two. Each franchise has their own esports team. We have our own league. Now, some of the, I'm not saying this is the case, but I know in some of the, like in Korea and things like that, you can have 500,000 people watch a game live.
Yep.
I think that's the numbers. And Donna's 101 years old. Thanks, Mr. Rugby fan. So I'm just reading the comment there. But it's a way of just thinking outside of the box. And saying, okay, how can we get kids involved? How can we get people that would never be interested in rugby, and vice versa?
No, it's a very, very different world we live in now. So I just feel like all brands and all products need to be conscious of that and be pushing engagement where the fans are, and most of them are on their phones. Most of them are on social media. Most of them are looking at different brands in those areas that engage well technically, and I do think there's a real opportunity. I feel like not so much disruption specifically, but that real engagement of fans through digital forums is a bit behind. It doesn't feel like it's as progressed in rugby as I see it in other areas. So I do think that's another opportunity, is to really look at how you engage your fans, use all different channels, look for those opportunities to cross-pollinate, as you say, and just understand that we live in a different world now. Where people's attentions are probably shorter, and the way they digest information has changed. So you've got to go where people are.
No, I 100% agree with that. Look, I don't know what happens in the inside of Sanzaar and all those boards. They probably have to deal with a hell of a lot of things. But I think the problem is that one of the problems, I'm not saying it is a problem, is that most of the people that go into the higher levels of rugby started off in rugby. So that's how they think. And they think scrums and lineouts, and they think, which is great for the game. But we're trying to think of a way of trying to engage newer audiences, and you got to actually get different people with different ideas to come into the back room.
Yep. Well, the New Zealand rugby CEO tends to be an ex-player, which shows where the priority is, and probably rightly so. But I do think there's a balance that needs to be struck there. These have got to be commercially viable products. Otherwise, we're all just wasting our time at the end of the day.
Yeah, look, I don't want to keep you on the line forever. I could talk all day. So maybe we should move on to the next few questions, and then. So here's the really big question, and I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of things to say about this. But stop the flow of players to the Northern Hemisphere. Is it possible?
Is it possible? I think it is. Yeah, I do think it is. But there's a lot that needs to happen. The bottom line is it's money, right? But article came out this week around Semi Radradra. I don't know if you've seen that one. He's had an incredible Rugby World Cup. Looks like he's about to sign a new contract. Big money in France, but he's homesick. So there's a rumor going around that he's going to turn down one of the biggest contracts in France to come back home. Which I thought was very, very interesting. And he's willing to take a massive pay cut to do that. But the situation you would love to be in is where, players can go where they feel comfortable and still be rewarded for doing it, at the right levels. And that's, at the end of the day, money talks. And having a product that's commercially viable is very, very important. So I know a lot of Kiwi fans might not like me saying this, but I do think privatization in the franchises is probably the way you need to go if you want to improve the product of Super Rugby, because you need investment. We need more billionaires in the game, right? Running teams, because it really requires investment. And that's to really look at the way that, investing in getting the right players here, investing in the product itself, making sure that, fans don't get all of that stuff. And it requires, I think, more of a commercial nous than it does specifically a rugby nous. So those are a couple of things that probably need to be looked at. But the way it feels at the moment is it's quite far off. I don't expect this problem to be solved in the short term. I actually expect it to get worse in the short term would be my pick. I just think there's a lot of excitement around European rugby at the moment, and certainly the investment there. And now that they're starting to get a lot of the players going north, it's all good news for European rugby.
Look, I read an interesting article. I was listening to a really interesting podcast about Saracens. I know obviously Saracens in the news for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
But the way that they keep their players it's very, very interesting how they keep the players, and they actually don't really focus in on the players. They actually focus in on the players' families. So they focus in on the wives and the children and things like that. So what they do is they get the wives a hell of a lot more engaged with the club. And I'm talking, they really take care of the families. So I'm not saying it's the kind of like manicures and pedicure, but it's all about education for the kids and, really supporting the families to try get all that information, try get them in the right schools, try to get them in. So when the husband says, I can go earn a lot more money over here, and then the wife goes, no, but I'm happier.
Yeah.
And it's about happiness. And if you look at where like Bona Barrett's now moved from the Hurricanes to Eden Park for family reasons, to the Blues for family reasons. But there was another interesting thing to say. Why are the Crusaders so well can recruit so well and keep the best players, when if you look at the Blues should have the most money because they have the biggest supporter base, and they should be able to have the clout to obviously keep the players there, but they're just not performing at the same level, and they're not being able to keep the players. So there must be something different that's happening in the back room at the Crusaders that's happening at the Blues.
I mean, they used to have a saying that a champion team will always beat a team of champions. It was more of a cultural. There always seemed to be a winning culture there, but also a team first mentality and a team first culture. And obviously, you've had some, really high level All Blacks that have been mainstays of Canterbury rugby and the Crusaders. So they've taken that mentality of the All Blacks and ingrained it there in Canterbury as well. And it's just built a culture of excellence and a culture of expectation, I think, there. a lot to be said for the cultural side of things. I think, and I must admit that it's a lot less spoken about in other areas, other super franchises. But it's certainly the one point that comes up regularly when you talk about the Crusaders is that they have, and you hear the players speak about it. New players that come into that environment, they speak about exactly that. It's there's a real culture of winning there, and there's an expectation on the players that they haven't seen in other areas. But there's got to be more to it. It just feels like there has to be more to that answer. I suppose you can look at it and say success probably breeds success. So, having a successful franchise attracts, a lot of the up and coming talent. That's probably another thing you can highlight. And also, I think they tend to have really, really good coaching setup and coaches there that always seem to be coming through the right system and being coaches of choice, or guys that have been in and around, some key players and have been able to influence them one way or another. So there's probably three things I can think of. There's probably a million more, that make up why that franchise in particular is successful. But yeah, that's going to require a pretty deep review, I think.
Well, look, I know with Rusty Erasmus coming in, who I think has got an incredible rugby brain, very, very good IP. I know that what he's basically come in and said, let's throw out the old model. We can't afford to keep the big Springboks here in the country. It's physically impossible. Like when I say the maths just doesn't make sense. Take a player like Andre Pollard, you could only earn a maximum of about 5 million rand here in South Africa. The maximum. That's it. Maybe a little bit more with endorsements and stuff. Go to Europe, get €1 million contract, 16 million rand.
Yep.
Literally, you'd have to play 3 years here in South Africa just to earn the same amount that you'd earn in a year. You can't besmirch the people for going. So what Rusty was basically saying, we are going to identify 70 players of national interest, and there's five players that we're interested in the number 2 slot. So we say our number 2 hookers, it used to be Malcolm, but probably Bongi now or whatever. And we say those are 5 number 2s, and that's who we invest our time and money in. We have a certain amount of money for those players. If all of them stay in South Africa, we can't pay them enough. So let the top guys go. Let the Malcolm Marxes go and the Bongis go, play overseas. And we just worry about the other 3. And so what they're saying is that they're called pony players now, players of national interest. So these 70 players are all in all the franchises, and Rusty, they have a say in how they conditioned, how their nutrition, their fitness levels, things like that. And they're basically saying, let the overseas players pay for our top talent, and we just focus on the talent that we want to develop here in the country. Now, that's a way of saying we're not worried about people going overseas. Let them just go, and we just deal with what we have left.
Yep. And similar thing in New Zealand. I know there's a number of players that we'll probably see it in the next Super Rugby season. The exodus of players that are going to Japan for that season in particular. And all of that's great for the national game. But for the franchises, it's a big issue. And I think that's why we're starting to see a decline in the Super Rugby product. I think New Zealand's a small country, so there's not a lot of money to go around. I mean, it's good that it's been successful to a degree over the last 10, 12 years, whatever it is. And obviously Kiwis love rugby more than anything, so that helps. But I think there's enough there that looking at digital channels to bring in global revenue is the only way that this product can be sustainable. And then you're not limiting yourself to what you can make in a stadium versus, and I don't know all the answers around digital engagement and how you can really promote Super Rugby to a global audience, but that seems like the only real answer. I just don't feel like there's enough money in New Zealand rugby, for example, to be able to pay those types of salaries that are needed, unless there is more money coming in from somewhere else.
It's a tough one. It is a really tough one. It's quite strange, if you look at something like the Six Nations and things like that, that's a seriously money generating competition. It generates serious revenue, and that's not just from the TV deals. I'm talking about the stadium attendance, the people that are going to the pubs. So we're talking about not just revenue that's made to the actual rugby union, but it's obviously the money that's made around that competition is just astronomical.
Yeah.
And I just don't think we can compete against that. And I don't think we should even try. The amount of money that goes, like South Africa, I think our salary cap is 60 million per franchise. I think that's the salary cap, which is, if you look at, I'm not sure what the Premiership, I think it's at £7-8 million. I think it's about that.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, which is double what we spend on one franchise here. So we're just never going to compete at that kind of level. So we can make as much money as we want in the world, and I just don't think we're going to get to the kind of levels that we need with money alone.
Yeah. One thing that's really benefited the All Blacks, I think, over the last, whatever it is, 15 years, let's say, is the policy of, if you're not playing in New Zealand, then you're not getting an All Blacks jersey. And I think if they ever looked at that policy and reversed it, I think you'd see a decline in the All Blacks, because you would see players going overseas. You'd see, I just think you'd see start some of the lower levels start to, and that's one of the big strengths of New Zealand rugby is the grassroots level, the lower levels, the Mighty 10 Cup, the feeder into Super Rugby. I just think there's a great rotation at the moment that benefits New Zealand rugby, which is the top players, they play here. And what they'll normally do is they'll come through Mighty 10 Cup, they'll go into Super Rugby, they'll go into All Blacks, and normally their last stop on the way out after coming back from Europe is to go back and play in the Mighty 10 Cup, as a way of giving back to the local clubs and helping to move forward with some of the younger players and give them their insights and view. So I don't know. I just feel like when you start to impact that model, you probably, I don't know, it'll just be interesting to see how it plays out, with different, because you're right, I don't know if we can compete with the North unless something radical is done. So what is the impact of players going over there and playing? Well, it's definitely going to hurt Super Rugby, that's for sure. But will it benefit the national game short term? How will it play out long term? We don't know.
It's true. I'm really interested to see the quality of Super Rugby this following year, because there's been a complete drain of top leadership across all New Zealand. I saw the players that are leaving to go play in Japan and all over the place, and that's a huge big swath of players that are leaving. South Africa is exactly the same, and it'd be interesting to see what level Super Rugby is at next year. I think New Zealand's skill level, base level skill level, is a little bit higher than most of the other countries. So I think New Zealand might not drop off too much, but I think there's still going to be a bit of a drop off.
Yeah, I mean, on the positive side, I'm really excited for some of the young players that are coming through. Yeah, some really good opportunities for young guys, and when I was having a good look at the franchises, looking through some of the names and just working out who's slotting in where, and I mean, you've got a race for a number 8 jersey for the All Blacks that's going on at the moment. And there's 3 or 4 young guys. Some have been in the All Black system, some are on the fringes that are really going to be pushing their claim this year to fill those big boots of the great man Kieran Reid. But there's some great young players that are coming through, so it'll be good to see some exposure there for those young players and get them some high level rugby experience and see how they go. I suppose that's the other side of it that I guess I'm looking forward to more than anything.
Yeah, I think we're in exactly the same. I think there's quite a few positions that we're also looking for a decent number 8. I think with blindside we're okay. I still think New Zealand's still trying to find a decent blindside, but Jerome Kane has big shoes to fill. Seriously big shoes to fill. So I think we've just got 1 or 2 more questions, and then and we can actually go on with that day. Obviously, you can actually go enjoy your evening. I think we just got this was a question of cost saving. I've got a few ideas about that, but I think we can maybe skip that one if you don't mind.
I think if you reduce the teams, then you probably reduce the cost, and probably.
Mine's more about sharing RP, so not tactical RP, but RP on sports fitness, nutrition, recovery, those kind of things. Instead of each country spending their own money on it, so that they have obviously Sanzaar approved centres for it. So IP gets shared, and if we brought in a tier 2 nation like Japan and Fiji into rugby championship, they'd benefit from having this shared IP. Because they've never invested and they never will invest in it because they just don't have the funds. But yeah, that's a discussion for another day, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, let's last question of the day. How do you see this coming year Super Rugby season playing out?
Yeah, as I say, there's going to be a lot of new faces in the various franchises, and I think it's one of the exciting points about this season. That I'm looking forward to. As I say, there's some young names there, and there's some key positions that need to be filled in national teams, and there'll be some real battles going on for those places. So there's a lot to play for the Super Rugby season, and players can really push their case. So that's one thing that I'm looking forward to. In terms of competitiveness and skills and all that side of things, I mean, just looking at some of the team sheets. It looks like there'll be some teams that will do, in New Zealand anyway, there'll be some teams that will be okay and will be able to ride the exodus of players, and there's some teams I'm a little bit concerned about. I think probably the Highlanders in particular, going through their team sheet, they're going to have some challenges on their hands. But again, good young players coming through, good opportunity for them. A couple of old heads coming back as well. Aaron Cruden's coming back from Europe, so he'll be slotting in there in the Chiefs. Warren Gatlin's obviously taking over the coaching role there for the Chiefs. So I think there's a lot to look forward to for the Super Rugby season. I'm excited, for it. In terms of competitiveness, though, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see how Beauden Barrett can position things at the Blues, and there's some other players there that can probably influence the Blues. So that'll be interesting to see. But it's quite hard to go past the Crusaders. They've had a bit of a drain there in their forward pack, so that might be a concern. Obviously, Scott Barrett there has taken up the captaincy role. But if I look at the team sheets purely, I think Crusaders look the strongest to me. And then very, very closely behind, I think the Chiefs.
Okay. I was looking at because I think only the New Zealand sides have already announced their squads. If I was looking at that, I think the Hurricanes. I think it's Hurricanes year. That's my personal thing. Even though they've lost Beauden, I think his other brother may slot in there at 10. Not 100% sure.
I think they'll play him at 10.
Yeah, the one thing that concerns me with Beauden going to the Blues is at the Hurricanes he had a really good 9 and a really good 12 around him. So yes. I'm just wondering if he's going to have the same 9. That same level of 9 and the same level of 12 that he had at the Hurricanes at the Blues. And
sure, there's a guy from England coming over.
Yes.
Joe Merchant, I think his name. I don't know much about him. I haven't looked at a lot of his games, but he's coming in with high reps in the centres there. So, and they're talking about moving Reiko Ioane into the centres, as well as a bit more of a mainstay there at the Blues. So I'd say the answer to your question is probably unknown. It's a bit of a cop-out, but it's hard to see. I mean, you've got a guy who's playing, relatively, and he's played there at 13 before, Reiko, so let's see how he goes. You've got a guy coming over from England, so they've certainly got a bit of promise there. Hard to know exactly how the Blues in particular will play out. They've always been a bit, mysterious, and it just seems like they've got the good team on the on paper, and then for some reason or another they can't pull it together. So, but I do think Beauden Barrett's going to make a big difference there. So I'd love to see them competitive again.
Well, I think the Blues have needed a world-class first five for quite some time. So I think he's coming. Speaking from a purely South African point of view, I think my beloved Bulls are going to be in a world of pain. I think they've had a mass exodus of player. Pollard, Vermeulen, Brits, these are all players. These are world-class players. They're not just just not average kind of players that you can just find someone to fill in their spot. I think the Sharks may still do fairly okay. I'm just hoping it depends on their coach. I think the Stormers have had probably they've lost the entire forward pack. I think the only player they kept was Peter Steff. So I think they've lost Cheapers, or what's his name? Kitshoff is gone. Eben Etzebeth's gone. You're talking, these are like seriously big players that are leaving. So I'm hoping that there's some decent talent that's coming through. But I think the Sharks, it might be Sharks year next year. I think they might be the team to actually watch next year to be the team to perform. I think everyone's got new coaches. It's quite up in the air at the moment from a South African point of view. But I'm just hoping that the talent's been identified and they've come through. I can't talk about Australia though. I really don't know where they will be at all.
Yeah, I mean, big change there, obviously at the top with Dave Rennie coming in for the national side. He's a really, really good coach.
Yeah, it's a good change for them.
Yeah, good change. I mean, I've done a video on this, and I just thought a lot of their issues are in the back room, the back office. There's some problems there. We won't dive too deep into that one, but yeah, I must admit I'm not too sure how they'll go. I think the Rebels have a reasonable team this year, if I remember. There was a couple of big names that were floating around, but let's see. It's probably going to end up being the usual suspects, in terms of the Waratahs and Brumbies probably performing well.
I think it's going to be. We talk about the status quo. We've come full circle in our conversation. Yeah. We're going to get to the end of the season. We're all going to be complaining that there should be more New Zealand sides at the top, and the conference system has knocked everyone out of whack. Who understands the conference system and the points? Yeah. And so I think we might end up in the same.
And no one wants to see the Crusaders win again. It'll be the same old conversations.
Yeah, but thanks a lot again, Zach, for joining on the show. I really appreciate it. Look, it was 51 minutes. It's quite a long. I wasn't expecting it to be this long, but it was super entertaining. I really appreciate you coming on. If people want to get hold of you, how can they get hold of you? Just give a quick rundown of your channel and.
Yeah. So my main channel is it's YouTube. So Haka Time Rugby, Haka Time one word, rugby, and I cover all sorts of topics. I try to be as unbiased as I can, but I cover all sorts of topics. There's a lot of wash up from the World Cup that I'm walking through at the moment, but obviously we're leading into Super Rugby, so having discussions around that, and also leading into Six Nations next year. So, but I like to cover all topics and like to get quite deep in the analysis. But really appreciate you having me on. Thanks a lot. I know we've been trying to line it up for some time, and really glad I did it. Enjoyed the conversation, and hope we can do it again soon.
Fully. I'm more than open. If you've got a topic you want to discuss on your channel, I'm always here to. We just got to try to sort out the times a little bit. Yeah, so it works out. But I really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for everyone for commenting in the channels. It's been really great. I can see there's quite a lot of a lot of chats going up there. A lot of Blue supporters, but there's always lots of Blue supporters. There's always lots of Bull supporters, but we just never seem to be happy with our teams. But thanks everyone for joining in on the channel, and I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful weekend and maybe enjoy all the Champions Cup rugby that happens this weekend. Chat soon, guys. Cheers.